Okay, so welcome everyone to The Best Way to Train. Today we're going to be talking about the way that we train dogs here at the shelter, and we're going to help you guys out in figuring out how you can also train your dogs in teaching new behaviors and in resolving behavior challenges. So first, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Robyn. I have been a member of the training team at the shelter for about 7 months now. So I'm really glad to be here teaching this class for you guys. I have about 4 years of professional animal training experience, and I'm a force-free shelter graduate. And the other person pictured on the screen here is Donna, and Donna is my supervisor, and you'll see them featured throughout the videos in this presentation. And also just a bit about all of those logos at the bottom of the screen there. All of these are different groups that we're a part of as a team here at the shelter. I'm really, really lucky to be able to work with a group of such well-educated people at the Santa Fe Animal Shelter. All right, so just kind of a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I want to let you all know that this class is being recorded. We'll hopefully be able to put up a recording of this on YouTube and share that with you all later. So that's kind of happening, so just be aware of that. And then also, I ask that you remain muted throughout the presentation unless you have a question. And I'll be asking questions on certain designated slides. So if you do have a question, you can ask it then. And if you're worried that you're going to forget the question, you can go ahead and type that in chat, and I'll take a look at that as I am going through the presentation. I also ask that everyone turn off their videos. That's just to kind of preserve the bandwidth on this presentation, make sure everyone gets a nice viewing experience. So I'll also go ahead and turn mine off as we're going through the rest of the presentation. All right. Okay, so Santa Fe Animal Shelter is a life-saving community, which means that animals that come to us are given the best chance they can to get adopted. And we're really only able to be that way because of your support and the support of our community at large. So if you volunteer, donate, foster, adopt, any of those sorts of things, you make this happen. So we really, really appreciate that. Also, a huge thank you to Purina for making community connection events like this possible through their generous financial support. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So these are some of the major topics that we're going to address today. We're going to talk about how dogs actually learn, why we use reward-based training, and we'll also talk about some of the basics of clicker training and different ways that you can teach your dog these behaviors. All right, so to start, dogs learn through a couple of different ways. And the first way is through associations. So there are some things that are kind of inherently meaningful to an animal, like food, right? And we use that inherent meaningfulness of that to teach our dogs that something else that doesn't have any meaning then and pairing it together means that we are going to be able to make meaning out of something that doesn't already have meaning. So in this picture here, you can see the dog is salivating at the sight of the food bowl, and then the bell is introduced. The dog doesn't have any reaction to the bell because he hasn't heard it before. And then in the next picture, you can see they start pairing the bell with the food, and the dog is salivating for the food and hearing the bell. And then in that last panel, you can see the dog is salivating at the sound of the bell alone. And so that's that that power of association, right? Taking something that had no meaning, the bell, and creating meaning. Dogs also learn by acting on their environment. This is also called operant conditioning. You can think of it as learning to operate on their environment. And what that means is, they learn to kind of move around their world, and that some things have consequences, right? So you can think of a dog who puts their nose against a hot stove, right? They learn really quickly that that was a bad idea, and probably I shouldn't put my nose onto the stove again. And as a positive example of that, you can think of a dog who sits and we give them a treat, right? They're learning basically how to push the treat button, how to interact with their environment so they can get the things that they want out of it. It's really good for animals to learn that they can influence their environment to get the things that they want access to. That's really important as we're working with our dogs to keep that in mind. So here's what that looks like in training. We're kind of combining those two different ways that dogs learn through associations and by acting on their environment. And so what we do is we teach clicker training. And you can see in this picture, there's a little clicker in the person's hand. And we start by charging the clicker, and that's just associating the clicker with food. So you click and then give a treat, and click and then give a treat. And soon enough, the dog is starting to associate that click with the treat. And then once they know that, we can start teaching them that the ways that they're acting on their environment gets that click and treat, right? So they learn to sit down and they get the click and the treat. They learn, that greeting people politely gets them a click and a treat, right? So they are able to figure out kind of the ways that they interact in their environment that results in something they want, which is the food. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about rewards and what that looks like in training. It's important to think about training with food and rewards in terms of payment, right? So here in this picture, you can see somebody's giving a bunch of money to another person, right? You can think about how we go to our jobs, and maybe we like them, maybe we don't, but we're working and we're getting something for doing that, right? We're getting money compensation of some kind for doing the work that we do. And if your boss just suddenly one day decided not to pay you anymore and asked you to keep doing those same things, you'd probably have a problem with that. I know I would, right? So that's definitely the same concept kind of applies to our dogs, right? We are paying them for a job well done. So this is definitely something to keep in mind as you're going through the training. It's not bribery, it's payment for doing that job. So in this picture, the dog is sitting, right? You can see the person is holding a treat in their hand there. Um, and we like when our dogs sit because it means that they're giving us space and being calm. So it benefits us to reward our dogs for sitting when they offer it, so that they learn that sitting gets them the things that they like, which is food, right? So it's kind of this mutually beneficial exchange of communication, right? We want to reward our dogs for doing the things that we like, so they like doing them as well. But it's important to remember that rewards are really in the eye of the beholder. So what I mean by that is sometimes, right, we think that pushing our dogs down when they jump on us is a punishment, right? We're saying like, no, get off. I don't want this, right? But that could be actually something that is rewarding to your dog, right? Attention can be really rewarding. Um, any sort of shoving can feel kind of like play to some dogs, right? So that kind of reward, it's a really good idea to pay close attention to what your dog actually finds rewarding. And avoid using those in situations where you don't want to reward them for that behavior. And kind of on the flip side of that, there are a lot of things that we think might be rewarding to our dogs that maybe aren't. So you can see, someone's petting this dog and they're not necessarily doing it to make the dog uncomfortable, right? Usually we pet our dogs and say, oh, good boy, good boy. But here you can see the dog is a little bit uncomfortable. Their mouth is kind of tight. Their eyes are kind of looking off to the side. They don't look very happy with that petting that's happening. So that might not be a reward to that dog right then. And it's also something that can change on kind of a day-to-day basis, or even sometimes hour to hour, right? You can think of this as a dog who normally loves getting pets, but when they're really focused on something, if you try to pet your dog, they kind of, move their head out of the way, or readjust their position so that they can still focus in on the food, right? So kind of thinking about that, right? A pet might not be as rewarding as food in that instance. So it's a really good idea to kind of stay aware of your dog's body language, and make sure that they're really actually enjoying the things that you're trying to reward them with. Does anyone have any questions at all about rewards and what that looks like for our dogs? Okay.
I have a question. I don't know, can you
Yes,
hear?
I can hear
Yeah,
you.
my dog does not like treats sometimes. I have some fancy ones that he likes a lot, but he doesn't always like a treat very much.
Yeah, that can definitely happen. Some dogs are a lot more food motivated than others. So what I would say for that is definitely, trying a variety of different treat types. That can be a really good way of kind of sussing out what treats your dog really loves, right? Some dogs love cheese. Some dogs really like hot dogs. Any types of meat can be pretty high level of reward. So kind of looking to see if maybe there are some other types of treats that you might enjoy. And if there's not, really focusing on keeping any sorts of training sessions that you're doing with treats really short, so that your dog doesn't have a chance to get kind of bored of the treats and of what's going on, right? So keeping it really short can help that sort of increase their interest. Also making those treats special for training. So if you want to like just put some treats to the side that you only use for training that he really, really loves, that can help as well. All right, and I see in the chat here somebody asking, what if your dog is not food oriented? That's, yeah, very, very similar to what this other person was asking, right? So with dogs that are not so food oriented, it's a good idea to try other types of rewards. So maybe they really like playing, right? Maybe there's a certain toy that they like. You can also use access to kind of, the environment. If your dog really likes to sniff around and smell things, that can be a reward for doing something. You can also introduce things like, petting, and sometimes, dogs will respond really favorably to just praise, right? When you get really excited and happy, they get excited and happy. So kind of working on those sorts of things, but then also really thinking about trying those different types of treats, looking for some food that your dog might orient to, right? Something that they really, really enjoy. If you have sometimes too, dogs that are a little bit more fearful, they might be less interested in food. And so that's something that you can kind of work up to over time. But yeah, trying as much as you can to see what your dog really likes, and how you can kind of harness that as a reward, whether that's attention or games, or access to the environment. And that kind of answered the other question too. Besides food, what else is a reward? So all of those types of things can work. And I see that Bessie is asking that, do you recommend using the click, and will you go into that in more detail? And yes, we're definitely going to talk about that more throughout the presentation. All right. Thank you all for your questions. Those were really, really good ones. If you have more, you're welcome to, of course, continue putting them in the chat. I'll keep going now. And if you think of anything else, go ahead and put that in there. All right, so now we're going to talk about why we use reward-based training. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but reward-based training is generally the best type of training because it's effective and safe and it lasts for a really long time. So here we also have some of the top reasons why we use it, right? It encourages agency and creativity, and it really feels safe to the dog. So first we'll talk a little bit about safety. And this is really one of the top benefits of reward-based training. If we don't feel safe, we don't learn as well as we could. Our learning process is kind of negatively affected by our stress levels, right? So why are we watching someone walk across a cliff, right? So in this video, Donna is hiking along a 15 stories high, 15-foot wide cliff, and their friend is doing filming behind them. And the friend is totally calm, feels totally safe in this environment, but Donna is actually afraid of heights. And so they wouldn't be able to really do any kind of learning at this point because their entire focus is just on surviving, right? On getting through this experience and coming out the other side. So it's important to remember that what is safe for our dogs is from their perspective, right? It's what makes them feel safe. It's not what we think ought to be feeling safe for them, right? So really making sure that our dogs are in a safe place when we work with them and that they aren't afraid of punishment, and that they know that we're listening to them and they feel safe in that sort of communication. All right, so another major benefit of reward-based training is this concept of agency, right? And that just means that you have control over what happens to you. So you can see this dog in the picture doesn't have any control about how she's approaching the waves. You can kind of see them in that top left corner of the picture there. um, she is, being pulled towards the waves. So she doesn't have a choice to move away. She doesn't even really have the choice to go forward. She's just being pulled into that situation. With reward-based training, we really prioritize our dog's ability to say no. We can kind of develop training plans that really go at the dog's pace and let them make those choices and still feel safe. So that's a really, really important part of reward-based training because when you take away something like agency, that actually erodes trust, right? It kind of diminishes that bond. And it also decreases the reliability of the behaviors that you've taught them, which just means that you might not be able to depend on your dog to do the things you've taught them in all different situations. So reward-based training also encourages creativity, which means that our dogs are able to make mistakes without fear of punishment or humiliation, right? Creative learners often will pick up on things more quickly, and creativity is required for teaching more complex behaviors and tricks because your dog needs to be willing to try things and really work with you and engage in a fun way with the training. So we talk about this concept of integrative training, and reward-based training fits into this. So you can look at this picture here. There's a pyramid. It's called the hierarchy of dog needs, and you can see that training is actually at almost the very top of that pyramid. So when people are coming to us and asking us about complex behavior issues, we will ask questions to get a full picture of the dog's life so we can understand if the basic needs that come below the training are being met. So is your dog feeling safe? Are they getting enough food? Do they have good social relationships? Are they getting enough sleep? Right? It's really important that we look at training holistically. So we're looking at it from all of these different aspects. We want to make sure that everything underneath the training is fulfilled as much as possible before we kind of embark on that training journey. And a lot of people have a question about kind of discipline in dog training and what that really looks like. So oftentimes what we think of as discipline is focusing on how we get our dogs to stop doing the things that we don't want them to do, right? This is kind of a picture, right? They're getting down in the dog's face and they're clearly upset. And so that's kind of a punishing experience for the dog. And so instead, we like to look at it from a perspective of, how do we set our dogs up so that they don't learn or practice the annoying behaviors in the first place, right? Reward-based training really focuses on setting our dogs up for success from the beginning by just not allowing them the opportunity to practice problem behaviors. And so discipline is therefore obtained through kind of this commitment to teaching our dogs what to do, what we want them to do, and then building on what they are already offering us. And that brings us to clicker training. So we had a couple of questions about this before. So we're going to talk about clicker training, and then we'll have some examples of how it works and how to kind of face different behavior challenges after we talk about this. So the clicker is important because it marks the behavior that our dog is doing correctly, right? We talked about this a little bit when I was introducing the way dogs learned, right? That's kind of the operant conditioning side of it, right? You're marking the behavior that your dog does right. Um, but it's also important to note that it doesn't have to be a clicker like what's in the picture here. It can be a word or a sound. For deaf dogs, you might use something like a hand signal or a flash of light, or even a tap on their body somewhere, right? So anything can mark the behavior. What's important is that you go through that process that we talked about, where you associate the marker with the food and going through that charging the clicker process with whatever marker you want to use. All right. So getting started with clicker training. We have a lot of different pictures here. None of them really look very much like training. And the reason for that is because of what we talked about with the integrative training, right? So here we're looking at, is your dog getting enough sleep? Especially right now with a lot of people working from home when they don't usually. Our dogs might be getting less sleep than usual. So really setting them up to get a good sleep schedule going. And then setting up our dogs with mental enrichment, like the food puzzles that you can see in that center picture. It's also good to address their physical exercise needs, right? And those can change throughout the lives of our dogs. And so it's really important that you're kind of aware of what sort of exercise is appropriate for your dog. And you can, find that out from a vet, or just kind of looking at how tired your dog gets or how well behaved they are or poorly behaved they are based on that amount of exercise that they're getting. And we also really need to make sure that our dogs have good social trusting relationships. And that can be with other dogs, like you see in that picture there with the two dogs lying together. But it can also be with people if your dog is a little less dog friendly, right? It's good that they have social bonds of some type. All right. And once we check off all of those boxes, right, and our dogs are getting enough sleep and they're getting enrichment and physical exercise, we want to first look at how to prevent unwanted behaviors from being practiced or learned. So, training with reward based methods is really a two-pronged approach. So, you can think of it as management strategies on the one side and training on the other. So, management can look like using different types of tools, like the baby gate in the picture here, to keep your dog behind one of those during meal times so they can't be underfoot, to keep them from rushing the door or jumping on people when they arrive at the house, right? There's all different kinds of ways you can manage situations. But management, of course, isn't enough on its own, right? It's necessary during the learning stages, but it's not going to get rid of the problem altogether. And so that's where the clicker training comes in. All right. So clicker training starts with food rewards, right? We talked a little bit about this with those questions that you all had earlier, and so something like a dry milk bone is not going to have the same value as something like a hot dog, right? But the value of that treat depends on the dog. It's also really good to make a little bit go a long way, so that you're not feeding your dog too much, by cutting treats up into tiny little pieces. So in this picture, the dime is a reference for size. You can see that the treats are about like pea-sized or smaller. So that's kind of what we're aiming for with the types of treats that we use. All right, so the way that we start using clicker training is we get our dogs doing the behavior, then we mark the behavior, and then we follow it up with food. So we don't start with any sort of names or labels for the behavior. So this is an example of what that looks like. And you can hear in this video, she is using yes as the verbal marker.
She's so cute.
And so again, the trainer wasn't asking for a sit, the dog was offering the sit, and the trainer could then reward with the click, in this case, the verbal marker yes, and then food. And this really encourages creativity in our dogs, right? They don't speak English, and so it's important that they understand that the behavior they're offering is what's getting them the food before we start adding the name to it. All right, so in this video, you'll see a little bit about how we add that cue into the behavior.
Down. Down. Down.
So you can see in that video, the trainer has the dog kind of doing a loop of the behavior, right? So the trainer's asking the dog to perform the behavior. She does it, gets the click and treat, and then the trainer tosses a treat to the side, so that the dog can stand up and then be asked to lie down again. And this loop is really helpful in getting the dog to understand what we're actually asking them to do. And so I know I just covered a lot of material. So does anyone have any questions about management strategies or the basics of how to start with the clicker training before we get into some more real life applications?
I have a question. This is Bessie again. My
Yes.
dog, I have had him about 3 months from the shelter. And the
Mhm.
first week or so, he was just really calm and perfectly behaved. And then he kind of settled in. I mean, I didn't even know he knew how to bark the first week. And he's become such a barker. He'll
Yeah.
just go outside and just bark and bark and bark. And if I bring him inside, then he'll still bark. Sometimes there's actually something he's barking at, but sometimes I think there's he just barks. and I don't know how to get him to stop. It's very annoying to me and my neighbors.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely understand that. The barking is a hard one. So I would first kind of ask, thinking about that pyramid that we looked at in the earlier stages, how much exercise is your dog getting, do you think?
Well, he's a small dog, so he has a pretty big run. And
Mm-hmm.
I try to walk him at a minimum of 3 times a week.
Okay, great.
Sometimes
Yeah.
I'll
So
just walk him down to the post box if I don't have time to take him for a walk.
sure. Yeah. So that sounds, like he's getting some good exercise in kind of the yard and the run, which is great. And does he have any sort of social relationships with other dogs or with other people, anything like that?
Yes, my daughter has a dog, and we take them to places where they can run loose. And he's a bit aggressive when he gets to another dog that he doesn't know, but he plays
Mhm.
really well with my daughter's dog. They'll roll on the floor and just play for a long time. And then he's
Okay.
been marking lately. He peed on her floor one day, which was not very acceptable. And
Oh,
he did
yeah.
that in my house too one day. I don't know why. There was no other dog here.
Yeah, definitely. I think, with the barking, it can be challenging to kind of pinpoint what is causing the barking, right? So if you give him attention when he barks, maybe that's rewarding. If he, is seeing things like out on the street or hearing things, barking in response to that can be kind of a little bit more of noise sensitivity or, reactivity sometimes, and really what you can try with that is in those situations where he's barking a lot, maybe trying to be with him and engage him with toys or with training, something else so that he doesn't feel like he needs to bark. And if you notice that it's always at a certain time of day when somebody goes by on the street or something like that, just setting it up so that he's not going out at those times, and really looking at how you can help him with that behavior. Barking is definitely a challenging one, though, that has a lot of nuances. So if you want to talk more about that, you can reach out to us at training at sfhumanesociety.org, and we can set up a phone consultation and we can talk about it in a little bit more depth.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I see we got some questions in chat. So let's see, how many hours of sleep should a dog have during the day? That's a great question. It tends to depend on the type of dog that you have. But it's definitely, a lot of dogs, when people are going to work for, like 8 hours a day, they'll oftentimes sleep through a lot of that. And the older the dog is, the more sleep they might need. Same with puppies, right? They need a lot more sleep too. So it depends on a lot of different factors. So that's another one that's good to ask your vet about, if your vet is kind of familiar with your dog and everything that's going on with your dog. They can give you a better idea of how many hours of sleep your dog should really have. Um, as far as facilitating sleep goes, during the day, just kind of taking breaks where maybe you go out and take a walk or something, and your dog stays behind and gets that extra sleep, that can help. Or setting them up in a place where they find really comfortable and just kind of leaving them there and going somewhere else, and having a nice quiet time for them can help that. We have a question from Mina. If you rely on the clicker and then you're out and about without the clicker, what do you do? That's a really great question. And so I'm kind of lucky in the fact that I can click my tongue and it sounds a lot like a clicker. So I oftentimes will use that if I find myself without a clicker. I also tend to have clickers everywhere, but I am a trainer, so I know that's not going to be the case for everyone. I have, I think, about 6 clickers right now, and they're in all rooms of my house in my car, right? So kind of thinking about that, just having them available in different situations, but then also, yeah, using some kind of other marker and teaching your dog another marker in addition to the clicker can be helpful when you are out and you don't have the clicker. If and also, if you can get the food to them fast enough, the food can sometimes just work as long as you're not doing, more advanced training. So that's definitely something to think about with your dog, teaching another type of marker. Yeah, those were all really good questions. So yeah, thank you for that. Do we have any more? Oh, I see one in the chat from Rebecca. My dogs are best friends, but one dog is territorial in the vehicle. I separate them, but is there anything that I can do for this? It's definitely, I think you're doing the right thing separating them. If they start getting kind of upset in the vehicle, that might be an indication that they're in kind of a higher state of either stress or excitement, right? If they know that they're in the car to go to the dog park, right, which they love or something like that, then you kind of you have them at this elevated level of excitement, which can lead to a little bit less control of behaviors. So yeah, definitely separating them, and then working to reward them for calm in the car, and maybe separately at first, and then eventually kind of bringing them back together. Um, all right, and then we have a question about how to stop a dog from jumping on you. This is definitely something that we'll talk about just a little bit later in this presentation. So I will get back to that when we get to that slide. All right. Oops. Okay. So polite greetings, this is that jumping question. Most people tend to start by saying, I don't want my dog to jump. But we kind of want to shift that to thinking, what do I want my dog to do instead? Right. So with the dog in this video, we want him to stop body checking people when he greets them. So what do we want him to do instead? We want him to keep all 4 feet on the ground when he approaches people. So this kind of applies both the management and the training into this behavior. So the management side of it is just instructing people, right? So if your dog is more likely to jump on people that are kind of approaching them on walks or coming into your house, right? It's a really good idea to just let the people know ahead of time, my dog jumps, if you could please not give him any attention when he does that, and starting there, or even just asking people not to approach, right? If your dog is getting too excited. Now, if he's jumping on you, right, and I know that you mentioned that that's what's happening with your dog, turning away is not necessarily always the best option, because that's some kind of movement, and your dog might think, okay, great, now we're moving, I'll jump some more, and we can keep moving. Whatever it might be, right? So it's best as much as possible to ignore the jumping, kind of putting your hands, maybe behind your back, or, across your chest. And as much as possible, just completely ignoring your dog, like maybe looking up and away, something like that. Because most dogs, when they're jumping, they're excited, they want your attention. If you're not giving that to them, ideally, they're gonna eventually try something else. Now, if your dog is jumping up and that's, it's a really big dog, or, maybe he's mouthing as well, that's a bit of a situation where you're not going to want to just stand there to ignore it. You might try backing up kind of slowly, again, mostly ignoring your dog. You can also try putting yourself behind some kind of a barrier, maybe a couch or a door, something like that, if they're getting really, really too excited. So that's kind of the management side of it. And then that last bullet point on putting the dog away. If you have people coming to your house and that's when your dog likes to jump on people, you can just put your dog in their kennel or in a safe room in the back, and give them something to do, and they don't have to meet the people. They don't have to engage with them. So that's another option as far as management goes. And again, management is not going to be enough, right? So managing is just one part of it. So that's where the training comes in, right? We want to teach our dog what to do. So we want to teach them maybe a default sit, and you're thinking, we want the dog to just be offering sits as much as possible. They know that a sit is a good way to get food, get attention, get pets, get whatever it is that they love. And so really working on rewarding your dog anytime they offer a sit. You can catch them when they're just doing the right thing throughout the day, and teach them that that is highly rewarding. You can also do something like teaching a nose target. And what that is just your dog kind of booping your hand with their nose. And that can be a really good one, because then when your dog is kind of coming towards you and you can kind of see that jumping look in his eye, you can put out the hand target, and he'll go and touch the hand target instead of jumping up. So that's teaching a really nice alternative behavior. Um, and that can be really helpful as well with the jumping. And then emotional regulation. So that just means getting your dog to learn that they can be excited, but they can also show good manners and calm themselves down, right? And we're going to talk about that in a few slides in a little bit more detail, so you'll get to see some of those emotional regulation games. And just to let you know, we do have a whole presentation, a whole community connection event on jumpy and mouthy dogs that's coming up. And so that's definitely something that if you're seeing that problem, that event might be a good option for you, because we'll go into things in a lot more detail than what we'll go into here.
Could you just repeat what you said, that other training? I didn't quite hear you.
Sure. Yeah. So we have another community connection event that's coming up that is specifically dealing with jumpy and mouthy dogs. So if that's something that you're having trouble with, that's definitely a good one to sign up for, because we'll be able to go into things in more detail.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I see a question came in about teaching nose target training. And the nose target is definitely a really valuable skill. We do teach that in our group training classes, but we also have a Training Tip Tuesday video up on YouTube that talks about nose targets and how to do that. And so I will go ahead and send a link to that in the recap email that we send out after the class. So that's definitely something that you can learn about there. And I think I missed one question with Yorkie male that is extremely bitey, bites everything, hands, feet, furniture, etc. Is there a way to mitigate this? Yeah, that's another really great question. Again, we'll talk more about those sorts of mouthy behaviors in that other community connection event. But definitely, thinking about it from kind of the management side, can you give him some kind of a toy or something to engage his mouth, something to chew on? Really setting it up for him so that he can put his mouth on something, because all dogs like to chew and bite things. But it's something that you're kind of choosing for him versus he's choosing for you. So definitely, as much as possible, setting him up that way where, if you know that he's going to kind of come towards you, having some kind of a toy out. to engage him instead, and then really working on rewarding what you do want to see. So if he ever approaches you and he doesn't bite you, right, that's something that you can reward. So yeah, thinking about it from those two different perspectives of the management and the training. Great questions, everyone. All right. So next, we're going to talk about recall or coming when called. All dog parents really want this sort of instantaneous and eager recall. So I'll show you what that can look like.
Yeah, girl.
Yeah, so you can see that dog responded right away. And so this is definitely something that we all want our dogs to be able to do. So the management side of this, if your dog doesn't have a good recall yet, just keeping them on a leash is going to be kind of the number one management thing here, right? So you can, in situations where you're in a space like a dog park where they can't wear a leash, you can go to your dog to collect them instead of calling them to you, just to make sure that you're not using a word and they're just ignoring you constantly. Um, it's also really important never to punish your dog for coming when called. So punishment, just like rewards, is in the eye of the beholder, right? So if you're maybe using your recall to call your dog to a bath that they don't like, they might feel punished by that. So it's a better idea to just go and collect your dog and then bring them to the bath in those types of situations. And so whatever that looks like for your dog, right? Knowing what they find punishing, and trying not to do that after a recall. All right, so the training side of this. Now, default attention is going to be one of the most important things to teach your dog before working on recall. Default attention just means that you are rewarding your dog anytime they look at you, right? You can see the dog in this picture looking straight up into the eyes of the trainer, and that's what we're looking for, right? So rewarding that and that attention and that tendency to orient to you is going to be really important. And now collar grabs. So you can kind of think about the recall as the entire behavior, right? Where your dog is off somewhere, you call them back, they come back to you. And then usually you're going to collect them if you've called them, right? Maybe to take them back to the car or, whatever it might be. If you're recalling them away from something dangerous, right, you're going to want to hold on to them. So we want to teach them that, grabbing onto their collar or grabbing onto their harness is actually a positive thing, right? We want to teach them that that gets them food, that gets them attention and rewards and praise. And so we really want to make sure that we teach a collar grab as part of the recall. And then it's really important to always reward for any time your dog comes when called. You can reward really heavily for this one, right? Because we want it to be a really solid behavior. So really high value treats, praise, games. If your dog really likes to play, or a ball, something like that, anything that your dog finds extremely rewarding, that's what you want to use in those instances. Recall is another thing that we do work on in our training classes. So definitely if that's something that you'd like some help with, that's a good thing to look into as well. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about loose leash walking now. This is a behavior that is way harder than we tend to give our dogs credit for, right? There's a ton that's involved here. Your dog has to learn to stay within the length of the leash, pay attention to where you're going, how you're moving, and maybe give you some eye contact, right? There's a lot that's involved. So it's important for this behavior, right, that we give ourselves some credit too. If our dogs don't have a perfect loose leash walk, that's okay. It takes a lot of time to develop this skill. So on the management side of this, the first thing we have written up here, everyday enrichment, right? We talked a little bit about enrichment in that getting started slide with the food puzzles. But basically what enrichment is, right, is any activity that gets your dog engaged with natural dog behaviors. Things like chewing and foraging and scenting and all of those different things that our dogs love to do. Um, the importance of everyday enrichment is that, if your walk is the only thing that your dog is loving about the day, they're going to be really excited, right? It's going to be a lot harder for them to stay in a kind of working brain and learn how to walk on that leash because they're just too excited. So, enrichment can include things like getting a digging box for your dog, playing with them in the yard right before you go for a walk, getting them interested in different food puzzles, things like that, so that their day is full of different and varied fun things to do, right? So that they're not just dependent on only that walk for any sort of interesting enrichment. It's also a really good idea to use supportive equipment. And what I mean by that is something like a harness, right? Those are going to be generally better if your dog is pulling on leash, because then they're not going to hurt their necks. And things like a front clip harness, where you're clipping the leash on to that front bit, is going to be helpful as well, because if they kind of pull forward on that, they're almost redirected to the side, where then you can maybe get their attention and reward for that attention and keep walking. So it's a really good idea to use a harness while you're walking instead of just a collar. And then also, if you are in a multi-dog household and you're working on loose leash walking, it's really, really important that you just work on one dog at a time to start. And that's for your sake as well as the dog's sake, right? It's really hard to manage two dogs, a clicker, and treats, and while they're both pulling, right? So making it easier for yourself and setting your dog up for success by just doing one dog at a time. As far as training goes, you're really going to want to be clicking for position. So thinking about where you want your dog to be. If you only care about them being within the length of the leash, you can start by just kind of taking a baby step and clicking for them staying within that length. If you want them, on your left side or your right side, clicking them when they're in those positions, right? And starting with this inside the house before you start working on this outside. And the reason for that is just because there are fewer distractions inside the house, which keeps your dog in their kind of learning brain for longer, right? The more distractions that they have, the harder it is for them to focus. So that's kind of, a more challenging way of teaching is when they're in the middle of all these distractions. So if you can work on it inside the house and then move it outside as they're successful. The 3 Ds, that third bullet point here, stand for distraction, duration, and distance. So these are, different ways of kind of increasing the reliability of behaviors and really working on them. So I talked a little bit about distraction just now, right? Distraction is a big part of a loose leash walk, right? You're out in the environment. There might be other dogs, people, cars, interesting smells, right? All of that. Duration, how long is the walk going? At first you might only get maybe like a minute or less of a nice loose leash walk, and you have to work up to more than that. Same with distance, right? Your dog, well, one might not be physically fit enough to go a very, very long distance at first, but also staying with you for a longer distance is going to be harder. So as you're starting to add these into your loose leash walk, it's good to do them kind of one at a time and not all at once, because that can take the training a lot longer. So you do that by, starting in the house, keeping the walks nice and short, and the distance very small as well. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about emotional regulation. I mentioned this earlier as an important concept in helping our dogs learn not to jump. And what this really looks like is us asking our dogs to regulate their own emotions, to be able to feel things, but not necessarily act out in those kind of inappropriate ways, right? Jumping, barking, those sorts of things. So in this video, the dog is going to be asked to wait for something that they want. So this is a former shelter dog learning that the sitting gets the toy tossed. And so I'll go ahead and start this video for you guys. And this dog here is waiting very patiently for a snuffle mat to be placed down on the ground. That snuffle mat is full of treats. So you can see that dog was regulating his emotions, which we're very excited to see those treats and holding it together. This dog you can see sat down before the toy got tossed. And then this dog is learning to wait at gates instead of just rushing the gate. So this is, definitely something that is a good idea to work on in a lot of different situations, right? Incorporating play to teach emotional regulation is a really good idea. So you can kind of insert pauses where your dog is learning to wait for the things that they want and control themselves a little bit more. All right, so management, right? First, we're looking at, are those basic needs being met? Sleep is a really important factor here. If sleep deteriorates, behavior deteriorates, and they're going to be more and more hyper just from that lack of sleep. Mental enrichment is going to be really key as well, right? If your dog is spending all day, lying around and not really doing too much, then asking them to regulate their excitement levels is going to be really hard because it's the only time they're getting to display them, right? So really making sure that they're having an enriching experience at home and kind of setting them up to be able to regulate their emotions and willing to do that. And then also preventing frustration. So not letting your dog just kind of run along fences and bark and go crazy because that can develop into behavior issues down the road. So kind of setting it up so that, your dog isn't able to run along the fence line, maybe just taking them outside on a leash or anything that you can do to kind of block that, right? And preventing the dog from being stuck in these sorts of frustrating situations that can really lead to escalated behavior and potentially, to aggression down the line if they're getting consistently frustrated over and over again. All right, so how do we teach this sort of emotional regulation? Tug with rules is a really great way to do this. And that just looks like kind of adding in a drop it into the middle of your tug game, right? So your dog is learning to drop the toy and look at you, and then they'll get the toy back and the game can resume, right? So we want to reward our dogs for waiting for us to give them their toys back, waiting for us before we toss their ball, whatever it is that we want them to do. And on that same note, you can use life rewards, right? Not just food. Things like going through doorways can be really rewarding for your dog, right? If they really love going outside, teaching them to wait and then rewarding them with going through the door, right? Like what you saw from that video. All right, so this video is going to be some real-time training with Baby Crunch, who's the dog here. This is a shelter dog from a different shelter where dogs only really get out of their kennels every couple of days. So it's a young dog, wild. There's hundreds of dogs in the nearby building, and he doesn't have that much training. So you can see here, the trainer is kind of pulling the toy away as he jumps up and trying to kind of get him to sit and offer a sit, but he's not really doing that at first. And so the trainer uses their hand to kind of lure that sit and then tosses the toy for the dog. And that's really rewarding for the dog, right? You can see he's just bouncing around, so excited to play. The trainer is just moving it again away so that the dog doesn't get the toy until he makes a better decision. Now the trainer's trying to use the toy here as a lure, but that was just too exciting for the dog. He couldn't really focus. So trying again with a toy with the hand, and then as soon as he offers that sit, toss the toy. And so this is just getting the dog to learn, right? Every time I sit, that's when the toy goes, and that's what he wants. So you can see in this one, all the trainer has to do is kind of just move their body just a little bit away, and he sat down. So that's definitely an example of kind of how quickly that sort of training can go with some dogs that are really, really motivated by what they're engaged with. Now with this dog, it's the same thing at the gate, right? You can see he's getting a little bit excited. The gate opens, he starts moving forward. So the gate closes, the trainer resets. There's no punishment involved, right? The only thing is that he doesn't get access to the other side of the gate yet. So that time he didn't even sit down when the trainer asked. So resetting again, he offers that sit, the trainer gives him that treat, tries again with the gate. And he almost did it, but then he kind of charged forward. So the trainer got some information from that, right? That was a little bit too far, a little bit too much for him there. So resetting again, giving that treat for the sit, and then trying that gate again. And then the trainer gives him permission to go through, and they go through together. So all of those are really valuable examples of kind of how you can work that sort of emotional regulation into different things kind of throughout the dog's day. And clicker training is something that is not only for dogs, right? This is for any animal. So it's, you know, a lot of people don't think that you can train cats, but it really is possible, right? It's the same as what we were seeing with the dog, teaching the cat to sit, spin, and high five. And this was all taught with marker training and food rewards. So that just kind of goes to show that, you know, clicker training really is effective for a lot of different species. This is what they use in zoos for, you know, medical treatments for different animals. And it's been used for a very long time. So definitely, you know, if you haven't tried clicker training already, I highly encourage you to do so. And it's a really, really great method of training, and your animals will have a lot of fun with it. All right, so any last questions before we close out here? I know we've already gone a little bit over time. I can see there's a couple in the chat, but if anyone has any other questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask as well. All right. So one of these questions is it okay to punish the dog if they pee on the floor? That's a great question. So with punishment, the thing about punishment is that it can often lead to increased behavior problems kind of down the line. So if your dog is peeing on the floor, usually there's a reason why they're doing that. Either, you know, they are reluctant to go outside, they haven't been out for long enough, maybe they're just, you know, not really very well house trained. It can be a lot of different things. It can even be if they're sick, right? So sometimes, you know, punishing that sort of peeing on the floor behavior is generally going to be ineffective because they don't really understand what's wrong with it, especially because it's kind of this involuntary thing that they need to do. So the other thing that punishing can do as well in those situations is just teach your dog not to go to the bathroom in front of you, right? Because they know they're going to get punished if they go in front of you or where you can find it, right? So then they might just try to hide it, and that can make things more difficult. So instead, you know, kind of thinking about how you can manage it to make sure that they're getting outside every so often, right? Maybe even starting on every hour, depending on the situation, and rewarding them for going to the bathroom outside, right? So that you're kind of giving them a reason to go outside instead of inside. If they get treats when they go outside, but not treats when they go inside, they're going to make that decision more and more to go to the bathroom outside. So that's kind of something to think about with that. Punishment is generally pretty ineffective, especially with house training. It doesn't tend to work. It just kind of makes them hide it. So yeah, really focusing on rewarding when they go outside and managing that environment so that they can go outside. And then is it appropriate to use the command heel? And I'm assuming that was kind of in relation to the loose leash walking conversation. And that's definitely, you can end up teaching that command or cue, the heel word, to mean stay with me. Generally, though, we're kind of working on operating from those principles that I mentioned before, right? Where we're getting the dog to offer the behavior first, and then we're adding the name to it. So if your dog is kind of reliably staying by your side on walks, you can start introducing that cue heel to kind of get them to come back to that position once they've already learned it. So it's definitely appropriate to use that cue. That's a great cue to have for your dog if you really want them to be next to you. But definitely, teaching them the behavior first, getting them to offer it first before you start naming it. Great questions. Do we have any other questions from anyone here?
I just have one about what you were saying about peeing on the floor. This dog is very well toilet trained.
Uh-huh.
The word for a dog. I have a little grand too. But I mean, I'll put him out at night, not even right before I go to bed. Maybe I'll put him out at 11 or something. And in the
Mhm.
morning, first thing, he doesn't even need to rush to go out. I mean, one time he did it at my chiropractor's office, which might have been marking from a previous dog or something. He did it at my daughter's house once. Maybe he was too excited. I don't know why he did it at my house. I can't remember the situation. Maybe my granddaughter was here that got him excited too. But
Yeah, there are definitely some dogs that are kind of excited or nervous peers. That that does happen. So that's definitely something to, I guess, keep in mind, right? Where if you're kind of in new environments, maybe making sure that he goes to the bathroom out front first as much as possible. And really kind of setting it up to be a fun experience for him. So maybe bringing along a familiar enrichment toy or anything like that. That can help as well, just to get him used to new spaces and make them positive. But keeping him calm enough so that he doesn't, kind of engage in that behavior.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No, this was helpful for me. I hope it was for everybody.
Yeah. Any other questions from anyone else here? All right. Well, definitely, thank you all for coming. I did just want to say that we can help out by our online group classes. I talked about those in a couple of different areas during the presentation. This is something that has been going really, really well for all of our different clients and students. So definitely that's something that I encourage you to look into. In that recap email, I'll give you a link for that as well. And just to kind of recap everything we've talked about today, it's a great idea to keep a sense of humor in your training. Mistakes are going to happen. That's okay. We want it to be fun for both the human and the dog. Getting a clicker or using a marker word, but always making sure that you're using that reward-based training. And then really keeping in mind the management strategies that we talked about throughout the presentation. It's a really good idea to make sure all of your dog's needs are being met and that you're setting them up for success. And then rewarding what you like. Even if they offer good behaviors outside of training sessions, you can still just kind of stop by and give them a treat, right? And every time we're rewarding that behavior, our dogs are going to be more likely to offer it in the future. So continue paying attention to when your dogs are doing the right thing. All
How much,
right. Well,
how much
again,
do
thank you all. Oh, yes. Yeah.
clickers cost? What's that? What do they run about?
So the training classes.
No, the clickers.
Oh, the clickers. Oh, they're relatively inexpensive. So I've seen, anywhere from, like $1 or two to, $5. It kind of varies, but yeah, they're not too expensive.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And yeah, thank you to everyone who came to the talk today. I really appreciate your support. And if you learned, even one thing from this event that you found useful, please consider donating so that we can continue to provide these services free of charge. And another thank you to Purina for making this community connection event possible. And if anyone has any questions for us, you're welcome to respond to that email that we send out later with any questions that you have. So I appreciate your time and thank you for your support of the shelter.